All right. It's great to be with John-Kane Berman. John is the policy fellow at the South African Institute of Race Relations. Last time I checked, he also sat on the council of the IRR. So it's great to have him here. And he was the CEO, the Chief Executive Officer for 18 years, John, right? You were in charge of the IRR for 18 years. Am I wrong?
No. 30 years.
30 years?
Yes.
Yeah, that was amazing, yeah? Great deal of
From 1983 until 2013 or 2014, yeah. 31 years.
I think you are the best person to talk to, given the occasional challenges that the RR faces in South Africa's environment. But I want to start with this question, John. We are going to explore a few topics here, and it's going to be around the Universal Basic Income Grant, which we have written about. We will talk about the current attacks aimed at the Institute of Race Relations that you were in charge of or, helmed for 30 years, as we've just stated. We'll talk about the upcoming local government elections, and also we'll look at Ramaphosa, how he has done so far, in your view. Where are the areas he's getting things wrong and where the areas are where he's getting things right. John, I want to start with the Universal Basic Income Grant. What is your gripe with it? What's your issue with the Universal Basic Income Grant in South Africa?
Phumlani, there are a number of issues, one of which is that it's quite simply unaffordable. If you think back to 2001, for every 100 people in South Africa receiving grants of one kind or another from the state, there were 313 people employed. Last year, for every 100 people receiving grants of one or another kind from the state, there were 89 people employed. So we have a situation where even without a basic income grant, there are far more people getting grants from the state than there are people who have jobs and are generating the output and therefore the taxes necessary to finance an income grant on the scale that is envisaged. We already have 18 million people on social grants. That was before the special grants as a result of COVID-19. Most of those are child support grants, the second largest category being old age pensions. If we were to have a basic income grant, it would in practice mean another 12 million grants paid to unemployed people and their families. It's simply unaffordable with South Africa's shrinking tax base and its declining economy. Those are the two key objections. The third key objection is that we need actually to focus on the country's real problem, which is the unconscionably high rate of unemployment. We have something like 44% of the economically active population unemployed on the expanded definition. More than 3 million of those people are so-called discouraged workers. We need to get these people into jobs.
And how do we do that? Some people ask, okay, well, how do we do that? Because people argue that, well, we need social grants because we have people out there who don't have jobs, therefore government must try and increase spending to help those people. But you are insisting that it's jobs that we need. But then briefly, how do we create those jobs?
With some pretty radical policy reforms, one of which is to embark on comprehensive liberalization of the labor market. And that would involve getting rid of minimum wage laws, which we have in various guises, and enabling unemployed people to reach contracts with employers at whatever wage the worker and the employer can agree upon. That means getting rid of all the minimum wage laws, which in practice work to price unemployed, unskilled, very often illiterate young people out of jobs. They will not be given jobs unless they can generate much more output than they are able to at the moment, and employers will not employ such people unless the minimum wage is abolished and the wage can be determined by agreement. In other words, it would be determined by market forces rather than by bargaining councils or decrees handed out by the Minister of Employment and Labour. Comprehensive liberalisation of the labour market is what is required.
Mm. In those reforms that you talk about, would you disagree with me if I were to say that part of that reform would need to be for government to get out of owning businesses, owning businesses like SAIRR, because these businesses, they are inefficient, they cost taxpayers a lot of money, they're bad to the economy, therefore they repress growth. You look at Eskom, the financial bailouts that go there as well, billions of rands. So would you agree with me that there also needs to be that privatization in the country that will sort of encourage economic growth?
Well, privatization is one of the things that we need, but that would have to be part of a package of making it very much easier for the private sector to do business, lifting all the restrictions, licensing laws, the huge system of permits that are required before you can do any kinds of business. So it's not only liberalization of the labor law that is required, it's liberalization of the total business environment.
Yeah.
Let businesses operate without all the restrictions and regulations that apply at the moment. And of course, privatization of the very expensive, very unproductive, and often very corrupt public sector would also have to be part of the reforms.
Now, what some people will argue, John, is that, well, you want to lift or you want to deregulate the labor market. You want to get rid of the minimum wage laws. What about exploitation? That people will be exploited, that people will be given slave wages, and therefore we need those interventions in the economy so that government can eliminate that kind of exploitation. What is your response to that?
Well, my response is to quote what a Marxist economist at Cambridge University by the name of Joan Robinson once said, which was that there's only one thing worse than being exploited by capitalists, and that's not being exploited by capitalists. The choice that unemployed people, 12 million of them, as I mentioned, in South Africa face, is not a choice between a low wage and a high wage, the high wage being the wage at which they are supposedly not exploited. The choice is between a low wage and zero wage, no income from employment whatsoever, dependency on the state, which of course increases the state's powers of patronage. And I think it's somewhat arrogant of the government or academics, NGOs that argue in favor of a national minimum wage or any other kind of minimum wage to say, well, we are not prepared to allow people to make their own decisions as to what wage they're going to accept. We will decide that you must be paid $3,500 a month, and you must be paid that. If you're prepared to work for $3,000 a month, we are not going to permit that. We are going to make that illegal. I think that is arrogant and pays no attention to the real interests of poor people Let them make their own decisions.
Mm. Now that leads me to the current president, Cyril Ramaphosa, of the ANC, who was very much largely seen as a person who was going to reform, to reboot the economy, to reform the country. That was the sense you got when Ramaphosa was becoming the president of South Africa in February 2018. Yes, 2018. And listening to you and having read what you've written, I sense from you that you are dissatisfied with how Ramaphosa is governing the country, especially on economic reform.
Phumlani, like lots of other people, I was very pleased when Mr. Ramaphosa was elected president, but it was very much the lesser of two evils. Mm-hmm. I hoped, as soon as he had executive power, control of the state and of his party, that he would seize the moment and start introducing necessary policy reforms, including reforms that would enable this economy to grow much faster. It was very, very soon that my skepticism, which I voiced in public at the time, was vindicated. I have not been surprised at Cyril Ramaphosa's very poor performance, because I had very, very, very low expectations of him almost from the word go. I think he has always been a very overrated person. I'm not sure that he understands how an economy actually works. And even if he did understand how the economy works, I don't think he has the political skills or the political courage in order to introduce the comprehensive reforms that are necessary to enable us to get back to reasonable rates of economic growth.
Now, some people have said, the people who admire him, the people who like him, have said that, well, the man is on the long game, because if he does things, very fast, very quick, he's going to collapse the party, divide it. So what he has been trying to do is to unite his party. And therefore, that's why things have been quite slow. Do you still buy the long game argument at this point in time?
I never bought it. I thought it was just an excuse to find reasons for his failure to do very much about the necessary economic reforms that this country needs. I've never bought that argument. I think the man is out of his depth. I think he's a political coward. And as I've said, I don't think he begins to understand what needs to be done to fix the crisis that faces this country.
Now let's take the worst case scenario briefly, then we can move to another segment. Suppose now Ramaphosa were to do the exact things that you would like to be done. And I think you and I are in the same sort of line of what needs to be done in the country. Let's suppose he were to do that. And he effects those radical economic changes, very much having to do with privatization, lifting of the regulations, as you laid out earlier. If he were to do that, would we see the ANC fracturing, breaking up the breakdown of the ANC, as some people kind of predict that if he does those things, he will break down the party? Do you think he would break down the party, that he would basically be in a position where he finds himself powerless in his party, and therefore maybe to an extent dislodged by some factions in the ANC? Is it too risky for him? Is it risky for him to pursue the radical economic, pro-market economic reforms?
Well, perhaps there's a risk that the party would fragment, but successful political leaders throughout the ages are people that are willing to take risks. And unless he's willing to take risks, this country is not going to go anywhere. It's going to continue its downward slide. We read now in the various newspaper comments and so on over the last few weeks that Mr. Ramaphosa has successfully outmaneuvered the so-called radical economic transformation faction of his party, and supposedly, therefore, he's in a stronger position politically in order to start undertaking some reforms. But my argument is not that he is scared of taking steps to liberalize the economy and to push up the rate of economic growth. He doesn't believe in it. This man is committed to the ANC's overriding ideology of the National Democratic Revolution. He favors a national health insurance system. He favors cadre deployment. He favors ever more stringent black economic empowerment and employment equity requirements, along with racial quotas, preferential procurement, all those sorts of things. Mr. Ramaphosa is as committed as the rest of his party and as committed as the South African Communist Party to a revolutionary agenda. He is not going to implement reforms because he does not believe in them. He makes noises from time to time when he addresses audiences of businessmen, but he doesn't mean it. It's hot air, it's platitudes, it's empty.
Now, I'm going to ask you this question because I think it's an important one. Is there, ever since he came to office, is there one or two or three or four things you could point to and say, that is a positive? I like that, what he has done, no matter how small it may be, but I like, this piece of work or this piece of policy or this piece of reform or this piece of initiative that you think, that he has done well. Anything positive since he came to office?
Opening up more opportunities for private generation of electrical energy is something quite useful. But on the scale of things that you need to do, it's a really pretty pusillanimous reform. We need to go very much further than that.
Now, I want to come back to, we've spoken about Ramaphosa. It's an election year. It's local government elections. So we're having this conversation at the right time. What is your sense of this election? Will it go well? Will it be smooth? Are we going to see? Because my observation is that the local government elections tend to have a lower turnout. People tend to rather choose to stay at home. But we saw in 2016 that those local government elections they led to a situation where the DA was in governance of Johannesburg, and they were also in governance of that side of Port Elizabeth, and now Gqeberha. How will these elections play out this year, in your assessment? Will they make any? Basically, my question is: will the ANC bite the dust this time?
I have no idea. I'm one of those people that doesn't really pay very much attention to opinion polls or speculation about how elections are going to turn out. I simply wait until we get all the results. So I've seen opinion polls showing the ANC is polling somewhat less than 50%, and the DA might get 23%, and the Freedom Front 13 or 14, and I've heard presentations by various people looking at these and other opinion polls. But really, one has to await the outcome of the election. I don't particularly want to make predictions. I will say one thing, and that is that polling that I've seen suggests that the ANC benefits from high unemployment, low incomes, and poor education. So that the view that high unemployment will work to a disadvantage from the ANC's point of view, I'm not sure that that is correct. Of course, one hopes that the DA and other parties that are involved in successfully running local authorities or participating in successful running of local authorities will be rewarded at the polls, that voters will see that corruption at municipal level is very strongly identified with the ANC and will therefore switch their support to the DA as the most successful of the opposition parties as far as local government is concerned. But I've no idea whether that will be a dominating issue in the election compared to the attraction for a great many people of the ANC's policy of racial nationalism.
Yeah, just as we speak about these elections, I just want us to move beyond beyond these elections now, and basically look into the future of the next 10 years of South Africa. I know, we are not a fan of predicting, as you've just said, but what is your sense? Are we going to see the ANC kind of losing more and more strength, and we see the opposition? Well, some people have argued that we are basically, the future of our politics will more have to do with coalitions. We are going to see a great deal of coalitions in the country as the ANC becomes weaker and weaker. I guess my question is, are you optimistic about the future of South Africa, given the current political environment?
I don't think it's possible to be optimistic about the future of South Africa as long as the ANC remains in power. And the question then arises as to how the ANC would behave if it were to lose
power,
a national election. What would it do? Would it accept the result, whether it's at provincial level or local level or national level? Or would it simply embark on a program of destabilization in order to make municipalities or provinces where it isn't in power ungovernable? The ANC is a revolutionary party. It doesn't really believe in democracy. It never has. It used violence in the second half of the 1980s and the first part of the 1990s in order to murder large numbers of its political opponents, members of the Inkatha Freedom Party, of the various Black consciousness organizations, ZAPO, and so on. So the question that arises for me is whether the ANC would ever accept the outcome of an election that it lost, or would it continue to destabilize in the 2020s in the same way that it tried to destabilize this country in the 1980s and early 1990s until it won power.
What about our institutions? Well, some people say that, well, the ANC, some people argue that it's going to take a while for the ANC to get out of power, because what they will resort to, what they will do will be to manipulate the institutions they are in control, they're in control of, especially our democratic institutions, Chapter 9 institutions, that they will manipulate them. There will be a lot of corruption, there will be a lot of rigging, so that the ANC doesn't get out of power. Do you trust our institutions to continuously conduct the free and fair elections that really cannot be hijacked or manipulated by the ANC?
I have no idea. I'm not sure that all our Chapter 9 institutions are functioning as independently as they should. Whether the ANC would not attempt to destabilize those institutions, to capture them, I've no idea. But I think the overriding question that we have to face is that this is a fundamentally corrupt and immoral organization with a totalitarian view of society. It will try very, very hard to capture all institutions that it has not already captured. It will attempt to capture the judiciary. Arguably, it has already captured aspects of the Human Rights Commission, and it will attempt to capture the Independent Electoral Commission. Some people thought it had captured the Independent Electoral Commission as far back as 1994. I don't think any institution is safe from the predatory and corrupt instincts of the African National Congress and its communist allies. These people are Marxist-Leninists. They're not Democrats.
And they are refusing to change to be pro-market, to be, because I always look at the ANC and you know, when I look at the way it's affiliated with the COSATUs and the South African Communist Party, voting together being one thing when it comes to elections, the culture of Marxism is still very much alive. And it's quite a troubling trend. It's a very troubling trend. Anyway, let me move on to the next segment, John. And that is, as we wrap up now, so I can let you go. The Institute of Race Relations is currently being attacked. There is a piece that was ran in the Daily Maverick, written by many of the people who are former members who formerly worked in the institute years back, and they are basically arguing that the RR that you were in charge of for 30 years has basically betrayed its traditions, the principles it was founded upon. They are saying that decades ago, it used to do great work when it comes to, you know, standing up for human rights, race relations, and so on and so on. That now it's off track. That now it denies. I think I read the RR denies climate change. It writes negatively. It writes negative things about COVID-19, or wrong things, I should say, about the COVID-19 pandemic, and that it's become more a staunch proponent of free markets. What are your thoughts on this, John? I mean, I think you are the best person to talk to. You know the Institute very well.
What happened when I took over in 1983 was that the United Democratic Front was formed. It was, in effect, a front organization for the ANC. And there were a great many people, including people within the Institute on the staff, on our governing council, on our board, and on our various regional committees, that thought that the Institute should join with many other institutions in civil society and affiliate to the United Democratic Front. I resisted that, and I've never been forgiven for preventing the ANC, the Institute, from sliding away and becoming part of the UDF and therefore under the influence of the ANC. It was necessary to rescue the Institute from slide-away liberals who, in our view, abandoned the traditions of classical liberalism on which the Institute had been founded. Let us remember that apartheid was not simply a system of racial domination, but it involved comprehensive interference with the market. Racial legislation influenced where Black people could find jobs. It influenced where in the country they could move to. It influenced what organizations they could join. Apartheid was an anti-market system. And once apartheid was abandoned, it was necessary not only to get rid of all the racial laws, but also to get rid of all the restrictions on the market. Hence the Institute's support for liberalization of the labor market, for getting rid of all the new racial laws that have been put onto the statute book. We never bought into the idea that many slide away liberals did, including some of our current critics, that the alternative to a system of white domination was black domination. We want a free society in which not only racial laws have gone, but also all restrictions on individual enterprise, on individual initiative, on markets have gone as well. So that there's a serious ideological difference between the people that are criticizing us, because they essentially are, some of them social democrats, some of them are socialists, some of them view South Africa through Marxist spectacles, some of them are fellow travelers with the ANC, and we are a classical liberal organization. We don't go along with their philosophy, and that's why they are very angry with us, because we have succeeded not only in avoiding being hijacked by the United Democratic Front as a front organization for the ANC, but we have survived and been able to sustain ourselves financially and sustain our political independence. And that's not something that we will easily be forgiven for, as these critics make very clear.
Well, when I read the piece, they also seemed to be critical of the IRR's affiliation or partnership or cooperation or collaboration with organizations like America's Heritage Foundation, Atlas Network. And the moment I read that, John, the moment I read that, I realized that this is an ideological bedroom, man. These people, as you describe them, they are basically opposed to the ideological values that the IRR stands for.
Well, that reference to the Heritage Foundation is simply an attempt at a smear tactic. It's guilt by association. I mean, to the best of my knowledge, we've never received a cent of money from the Heritage Foundation. Shortly before Franz took over as CEO from me, I took him to Washington and I introduced him to the Heritage Foundation. I introduced him to the International Republican Institute, the National Endowment for Democracy, and the National Democratic Institute, and also to my contacts in the State Department. And the Institute has received funding from not only the National Endowment for Democracy in Washington, which channels money via the International Republican Institute to us, but we also received money for a long time from the Friedrich Naumann Foundation, which is affiliated with the German Free Democratic Party, which is one of the closest parties in the world ideologically to where the Institute stands. If these people want to condemn us for our affiliations, why don't they attack us for receiving funding from the German Liberal Free Democratic Party? Their attempt to smear us with the Heritage Foundation is really, it's childish, it's nonsense.
Well, thank you very much, John. It's been a very interesting conversation I've heard with you, and thank you for joining us. But I just want to ask you, I have a minute now left. Some people out there, they are saying that the RR is it's ignorant on racism, on matters of race. How do you respond to that briefly?
We have a long history of analysis of racial legislation going back to the 1930s, and we conduct, and we have been conducting for now 20 years, comprehensive opinion surveys on racial attitudes in South Africa. We analyze and understand the law. We have a greater understanding of the history of racial legislation in this country than any other organization in South Africa or anywhere else. And I think we still have a much deeper understanding of current racial legislation than anyone else in this country or elsewhere.
John, thank you so much. John-Kane Berman, a policy fellow at the South African Institute of Race Relations. He writes amazing stuff. You can read his column every week, John, right? You publish every week on Politics Web. That's where your column is published. He's also
and Daily Friend, yes.
And Daily Friend, yes, and Daily Friend. So that's where you can find his weekly column, which I always find insightful and very informative. So thank you so much, John. John, for being here today.
Thanks, Phumlani. I've enjoyed it very much. I hope you have too.